Silence, please, all stand. Coroners Court is now sitting.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honour.
Good morning, Mr Hucker.
Call Miss Rebecca Lowe. She'll be giving evidence via AVL, Your Honour.
Ms Lowe, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can, thank you.
All right, you'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Mr Hucker.
Thank you, Your Honour. Would you please state your full name,
Rebecca Lowe,
your occupation,
product manager.
and your business address?
I work for Weather Zone in Sydney.
Did you give a statement to the New South Wales Police on the 13th of July 2020?
Yes,
Have you read that statement recently?
yes.
Are there any changes that you would like to make to that statement?
No, just that my occupation and company has changed since then.
As you previously worked for Metro Weather Australia Proprietary Limited.
Yes, that's right.
How long did you work with Metro Weather?
About 4 years within Australia. Previously, I worked for them in New Zealand. So Metro Weather is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Meteorological Service of New Zealand. So previously, I worked for that company in New Zealand for about 4 years before moving to Australia, where I worked for Metro Weather for just under 4 years.
And when did you leave Metro Weather?
About 18 months ago.
Metro Weather has an exclusive agreement with TOA Systems for the resale of data from the Global Position and Tracking System, i.e. the GPAT system, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And TOA own and operate the GPAT system?
Yes, that's right.
The GPAT system uses ground-based sensors to detect lightning strikes.
Yep, that's right.
Are you able to describe how those sensors work?
So within Australia, there's the GPAT system has over 150 sensors, and they work through a time of arrival system where there's they'll detect the frequency of the lightning strikes, and usually it will take a few of those sensors to help triangulate the location and strength of each lightning strike. Those sensors are spread throughout Australia.
So the time of the arrival system, that uses the time that the lightning strike is detected by each sensor and then triangulates back from that the likely location of the lightning strike.
Yes, that's right.
So the accuracy in part depends upon multiple sensors operating.
That's right, and also depends how many sensors are in the area. So the accuracy can vary a little bit throughout Australia depending on how many sensors there are. For example, the accuracy tends to be a lot higher along the East Coast and around the cities where there's a lot more sensors, whereas in Central Australia, the accuracy might be a little bit lower where the sensors are a little bit more spread out.
Do you know how many sensors there are in New South Wales?
I'm not sure, sorry.
No problem. So we'll come back to accuracy shortly. But in June 2020, were you approached by Detective Sergeant Holgate from the New South Wales Police in relation to the Gospers Mountain bushfire?
Yes, that's right.
And did he inform you that the nearest strike, lightning strike, shown in the GPAT system was 6 kilometres away from a tree that had been identified as having been struck by lightning?
Yes, that's right.
In response to that, did you obtain raw lightning data from TOA systems for the 1st to the 26th of October 2019?
Yes, that's right.
And how many potential strikes did you identify from that raw data?
So referring to my statement on the page 132, said that the query yielded a total of 8 potential strikes. Some of those were ground strikes, which means the lightning reached the ground, whereas others were cloud strikes, which means they were above the ground within the cloud.
Did you have regard to weather maps on the Bureau of Meteorology to filter out potential valid strikes?
Yes. So as I had mentioned in my statements, I referred to Bureau of Meteorology radar imagery to overlay where those potentially valid lightning strikes had occurred with what the radar data looked like at the time.
You identified one strike that was potentially valid in the general area of origin of the fire?
Yes, that's right. So we separated the ground strikes from the cloud strikes, as the ground strikes, as mentioned, would be the only ones that were expected to have reached the ground. And then among those ground strikes, only one of them had occurred within the vicinity of where the radar data showed that there was rain in the area.
Was that the strike at 10:55 a.m. on the 26th of October 2019?
Yes, that's right.
You created you overlaid the coordinates of that strike on 2 images taken from the Bureau of Meteorology. We'll just bring those up from page 135 of the brief. So is this taken about 1.5 minutes before the strike?
Yes.
If we can turn to the next page. And this one, this image, about 4.5 minutes after the strike, which shows the rain event over the coordinates of the strike.
Yes, that's right.
Is it common for lightning to strike out in advance of a rain event?
Yes, that's right. So the radar data may not necessarily show rain falling where the lightning strike occurs, because the radar won't be picking up on like higher cloud within the storm. So sometimes lightning can strike out ahead of the storm where rain isn't necessarily falling at the time.
So is it your view, having regard to the data and the radar images from the Bureau of Meteorology, that this strike was a valid lightning strike?
I can't say with 100% certainty, but with high likelihood, yes.
So I'm going to address now the accuracy of the location data for the strike. So there's a report in the brief from Associate Professor Trevor Blackburn, who is an electrical engineer. He states that the uncertainty in relation to lightning flashes on the system used, being the GPAT system, is, in his words, typically about 1 to 1.5 kilometres. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I guess it depends on a number of factors. As I mentioned, the number of sensors in the area, as well as how many sensors were online at the time. So as I'd stated in my statement, I'll find the page on 132. So for the Gosford Mountain region, the network location accuracy for GPAT is expected around 200 to 250 meters. However, there were a couple of sensors in the region that were down at the time. TOA technical support had informed me that they did not believe that those 2 sensors that were down would significantly impact the location accuracy in that region. However, there is the possibility that it could have affected the location accuracy to some extent. I guess, yes, it's not out of the question that the location accuracy could be as far as 1 kilometre.
Did TOA Systems inform you that it was the sensors in the Sydney area that would have compensated?
Yes, that's right.
And did they explain to you why, given the distance of Gospers Mountain from Sydney and the rough terrain in between the Sydney area and Gospers Mountain, namely a significant part of the Great Dividing Range, would not have had an adverse impact on location accuracy?
The lightning sensors are able to detect lightning that occurs hundreds of kilometers away. So it doesn't necessarily have to be really close to the sensor to be detected by those sensors. However, the closer the lightning strike to the sensor, the higher likelihood of that being very accurate. So, yes, they did say that they believe that the sensors in the Sydney area would have been able to compensate for that. But that's really all the information that they had provided to me.
No, I understand. I'll show you now a map that was prepared by the New South Wales Police, which is on page 181 of the brief. Can you see that on your screen, Ms. Lowe?
Yes.
Just to fill you in, do you see the small fire icon with the number marked 2 pointing to it?
Yes.
So that's the coordinates of a tree that's been identified by an expert fire investigator as having been hit by lightning and the likely point of origin of the fire. There are potentially 2 other trees that have been identified as potentially affected by lightning within about 40 metres of that location. Do you see also on the screen number 1 on the right-hand side?
Yep.
Sorry, we've lost it for a moment. That is the coordinates of the lightning strike that you identified, which is about 1 kilometre away from the trees which have been detected by the investigators. Are you able to reconcile the fact that the only lightning strike detected in the general area is about 1 kilometre away from the trees that have been identified as being affected by lightning?
Yes. And while we can't say with 100% certainty that this strike that this potentially valid strike had struck the tree, it is quite possible that the strike had occurred close enough, and that the accuracy of the network was within 1 kilometre in this area. So it's certainly not out of the question that this could be the lightning strike.
Thank you. Just one final question, Ms. Lowe. On the GPAT system, if a single lightning strike leaves a cloud and then on its route to the ground forks out to make contact with the ground in, say, 2 locations, is that detected as a single lightning strike or as multiple lightning strikes?
Usually it would be multiple lightning strikes. So if there's more than one impact on the ground, that would be recorded with the network in 2 different places, just with the same time.
Would that include if the impacts are, say, within 40 metres of one another?
Yes, so I have seen lightning data from the network where there's quite a few, say 10 or more ground strikes that were reported within 500 meters or so. So it's not necessarily to say that those were all from the same lightning bolt where it branched out, or just from multiple lightning strikes within that same area. The other thing to note is that a lightning strike that reaches the ground can have multiple what we call return strokes, where it reaches the ground and then it it would look like a strobing effect, but the same lightning strike can basically go up and down the same channel multiple times within milliseconds. So most of the time the network would report that it's just one single strike, unless it's detecting differing amplitudes within that. So sometimes the network might say that there was say a few strikes that occurred at the same location and the same time, but with different amplitudes and polarities, which might mean just one of those strikes that has multiple return strokes within it.
Thank you, Ms. Lowe. Your Honour, I have no further questions.
If you wouldn't mind just waiting, Ms Lowe, I'll just see if there's any other questions. Mr Newton?
No questions, Your Honour.
Right. Thank you very much, Ms Lowe. You're excused.
Thank you.
Your Honour, the next witness will be in relation to the Gross Valley fire, and will be Sergeant Neil Welshinger. Welshinger, my apologies, Your Honour.
Sergeant, are you able to see and hear us in the courtroom? Sergeant, can you see and hear us?
Ben, thank you. Yes.
All right, you'll just hear from the court officer now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Silence, please. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr Wilcox.
Would you please state your name, rank and station?
Neil Welshinger. I'm a senior sergeant attached to Sydney Crime Scene Section with the New South Wales Police.
And you're a trained fire investigator, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And you have experience in that field?
In both structural and wildfire, yes.
You provided a statement for this inquiry dated 22 October 2020, correct?
Correct, yes.
Are the matters set out in that statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are, yes.
Is there anything you wish to amend in that statement?
No.
Can you describe to the court how you came to be involved in the investigation of the Gross Valley fire?
Yes, look, day-to-day operations within the forensic services branch within the police, and I guess on this particular day, other previous fires associated with the Blue Mountains had been investigated in conjunction with State Crime Command Police and local detectives. And on this particular day, it was organised for the Gross Valley fire to be examined as such with local detectives, Rural Fire Brigade and New South Wales Fire Brigade investigators.
When you talk of this particular day, is that the 21st of January 2020 when you went out to make observations of where the Gross Valley fire had been?
Correct, yes.
And who was it that tasked you to attend the Blue Mountains on that day?
Yeah, I don't have exact name. Unfortunately, it was sort of just part of the daily required attendance.
Would that have been one of your superiors in the police command that you work in?
Yes.
And were you tasked on the same day to go out there?
Correct, yes.
Do you
I'd been
know-
previously organised, I suppose, at a time and date, yep.
The first you knew of this tasking was on the 21st of January 2020 though, was it, or earlier?
Oh, potentially the day before, it may have been organised, yes.
Do you know who, if anyone, from New South Wales Police requested someone from your command conduct the inquiry which you undertook?
Sorry, not specifically, no.
Do you recall any details of the scope of what it was that you were requested to investigate?
Yes, essentially it was allocated the Gross Valley fire for investigation, and at that stage, I guess it was believed to be associated with the Gross. My apologies, the Gospers fire, and it was just as it changed the boundaries over the river, to further investigate that fire.
Were you provided with any geographic area of interest to focus your investigation?
So on that particular morning, we attended the emergency services building there at Katoomba, where we liaised with the staffing there to obtain the maps and references to assist us with identifying where that may have commenced.
And the place that you went, was it the Katoomba Fire Control Centre?
Correct, yes.
Why was it that you attended that particular location on that occasion?
I guess as a meeting point for potential briefing and to obtain information. I guess from the police perspective, we didn't quite have those informational maps and the recordings of the actual movement of fires. So it was a point where we could try to obtain that information.
Did anyone coordinate the cause and origin investigation on the 21st of January 2020?
My apologies. Did someone
coordinate that investigation?
Look, the Rural Fire Investigation Officer Darren Howe essentially had a big part as a conduit for the liaison with the other rural fire staff at the emergency services office there. Yes.
And the emergency services office is the Rural Fire Service office?
My apologies. Yes, the main office there.
You said in your statement you were informed that the Gospers Mountain fire had travelled across the Bells line of road, south of the Walls Lookout walking track and over the escarpment into the Gross Valley, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And who informed you of those matters?
The Darren Howell was essentially the one who passed on that information obtained from the Rural Fire Centre.
And that information was communicated to you for clarity on the 21st of January 2020?
That's correct, yes.
Have you received your examination notes today and reviewed them?
I did, yes.
You wrote in those notes that you spoke with the coordinator and obtained log info and maps, correct?
Correct, yes.
And in your statement, you said that Mr. Howell obtained some information regarding the Gross Valley fire, correct?
That's right, yes.
In terms of the coordinator you spoke with, who was that?
I don't have a name, sorry.
And what organisation were they from?
I believe that was the Rural Fire Service.
And that wasn't Mr. Howell?
No, he was liaising with the other coordinator on this particular day, yes.
And was that person physically at the location at Katoomba Fire Control Centre or somewhere else?
Yes, at the fire centre.
And who obtained the log info and maps that you referred to?
Mr. Howell.
And what was in that log info?
And further on their computer system as well. I'm not quite too sure if that's referred to as the icon system.
And did you personally obtain any additional information or material at the Fire Control Centre?
Not personally, no.
You said in your statement that the aim of your investigation was to determine where the fire had crossed the Gross River, correct?
Yes.
And who developed that specific aim?
I guess between Mr. Howe and myself, and within the state crime police, it was a case of it was identified that that was a boundary change and considered a new fire, whereas the Gospers Valley was already being investigated. This one required a separate investigation.
So on the 21st of January 2020, after attending the Fire Control Centre in Katoomba, you proceeded to the Walls Lookout walking track, correct?
That's right, yes.
And who made the decision to attend that place?
Between myself and Mr. Howe, it was the closest and safest area where we would be able to view the valley and attempt to determine where it may have crossed by visual examination. Information from the national parks had indicated that the area was unsafe, still with the burnt trees and fallen debris, and certainly the escarpment made it difficult to further examine that area.
And all of that information was received at the Fire Control Centre, was it?
That's correct, yes.
You were also accompanied by Susan Bayliss from Fire and Rescue New South Wales at Walls Lookout, were you?
Correct, yes.
Did she bring a drone with her?
No drone. Oh, I'm sorry. If she had it, it definitely wasn't used. Sorry.
Right, so she had one, but it wasn't used. Do you know why it
I'm
wasn't
not too sure. Sorry, I'm not too sure if she had one.
Oh, you're not sure either way, that's fine. When you were at Walls Lookout, you used a map which Mr. Howell had to orient yourself to the area where it was most likely that the fire had crossed the Gross River, correct?
That's right, yes.
And having made observations, you identified an area of heavier fire damage to the bush relative to its surrounding area, correct?
Correct, to the west of the lookout, yes.
And what was the that observation?
I guess the greater fire damage indicated a area where the fire was concentrated for a longer period of time, suggesting that that's probably where the fire had burnt the longest, suggesting that's probably where it had travelled from.
I'll bring up page 69 of the brief. Do you have the red page numbers with you?
I do, yes.
It's also on screen. That's a photo that you took from Walls Lookout during your scene examination on 21 January 2020, correct?
Yes.
And where is the area of greater fire damage, if at all displayed on that image?
Correct. So basically, where your marker started there, it phases from a greener area, and then where your marker was there's some moving towards the brown charring of the trees there, and it's that particular area which is on the northern side of the river. So the fire would have travelled off the escarpment down towards that particular area. Yeah.
Greater fire damage is the blackened area, correct?
Correct, yes.
I'll take you now to page 62 of the brief, which I'll bring up. Did you prepare that document?
Correct. That was from my initial notes. Yes.
And it shows, doesn't it, Walls Lookout where you made your observations?
That's correct, yes.
And it shows the Gross River and Bells line of road, correct?
That's right, yes.
And the red arrows show a fire travelling across Bells line of road into the Gross Valley and towards Gross River and Walls Lookout, correct?
That's right, yes.
Thank you. You concluded then that the cause of the Gross Valley fire was determined to be associated with the Gospers Mountain fire spreading across Bell's Line of Road, did you?
Yes, that's correct.
And that you concluded the fire travelled over the escarpment into Gross Valley, travelling south and crossing the Gross River, correct?
Yes, correct.
And in your statement, when you stated that the Gross Valley fire was determined to be associated with the Gospers Mountain fire, did you make that determination or did someone else make that determination?
Oh, look, it was a determination based on information supplied to me, essentially. Yes, having not been involved in the Gospers fire, it was essentially the determination was relied on that information. Yes.
Did that information come from the RFS or the police or someone else?
Yes, from the RFS.
And it's the case that you were not able to identify the precise area where the fire breached the river, correct?
Not exactly, no.
Is that the reason why in your notes under the field or title Cause and Origin you wrote the word undetermined?
Yes, correct, yes.
Did you identify whether there were any walking tracks on either side of the Gross River close to the estimated area where the fire breached the Gross River?
From my understanding, there is a walking track along the river, yes.
Did you know if there was a walking track over the specific area where you were focused with your investigation?
It was a walking track to the Walls Lookout, and there is another one to the west of the Walls Lookout, I think, as well.
Did you exclude other potential causes of the fire, such as from campfire, smoking, or juvenile fire play?
Oh, there's certainly considerations, but again, without examining the exact area of origin, I guess I can't comment on those.
But it was certainly your impression that having regard to the information as to the fire moving from Bell's Line of Road, that was the likely cause of the fire continuing over the Gross River, correct?
That's correct, yes. There was no reports of a sort of a separate fire whilst the Gospers one was on.
And following your investigation, did you provide the results of that investigation to anyone within New South Wales Police?
Correct. Then I believe once a local investigator was allocated, I did commence to liaise with that detective.
And who is that detective?
My apologies. I'd probably have to go through some emails to.
Could it have been Detective Sergeant Laura Harvey from Hawkesbury PAC?
Thank you. That's correct. Yes.
When did you first have contact with her in relation to the Gross Valley fire investigation?
It would be a few days after my examination, or not long after my examination. Once I realised, I can't quite recall if it was an email that was sent to me indicating from Laura that she was the investigator, or if I'd made contact with the State Crime Command to get her name.
Can you explain, after concluding the investigation, what material in terms of, did you put it into a report? Who did you send it to?
Correct. Yeah. So the briefs that are compiled just from day-to-day jobs are technically reviewed and uploaded to a digital records management system. And photographs are uploaded to an imaging database.
When you undertook the examination on the 21st of January 2020 of the Gross Valley fire investigation, Were you aware that there had been a backburn at the Mount Wilson area on the 14th of December 2019 that breached containment and impacted surrounding properties in days that followed?
That was mentioned and talked about, yes.
When was that mentioned and talked about?
On the 21st.
And who did you discuss that with?
That was with Mr. Howell as well, and Susan Bayliss.
And what was the content of that discussion?
That there was to assist with maintaining the Gospers fire and to potentially protect houses and stop it crossing the road. The information was that a backburn had been done by Rural Fire Services.
Was that identified to be relevant in any way to your cause and origin investigation of the Grose Valley fire?
It was considered, I guess, yes.
In what way was it considered?
Well, I guess if it was, if the backburn was the actual fire that crossed the road, which would have been the cause of then been the cause of the Grose Valley fire, I guess.
And what was the conclusion, having considered that issue?
Well, the conclusion was, I guess, that fire was a separate one and being investigated separately. So I guess my part was to concentrate on the Grose Valley fire, I guess.
When you say that you had a discussion, perhaps by email, with Detective Harvey, do you remember what the content of that discussion or email chain was?
No, look, I guess it was myself just liaising with her and keeping her abreast of the information that I had for the Grose Valley fire.
Did Detective Harvey say anything about the location of where you conducted the cause and origin investigation?
No, I guess I explained that I was limited in my examination from the lookout, and certainly wasn't able to go into the valley to conduct a closer examination.
Did she raise the Mount Wilson backburn as a event of interest in relation to your cause and origin investigation?
It was flagged as information that may have occurred and may have been a cause, yes.
Did she ask you to attend upon the Mount Wilson area to conduct a further cause and origin investigation?
No, that wasn't required or requested anyway.
Did you consider that the information you received about the breach of containment of the Mount Wilson backburn, did you consider that that information had relevance to your cause and origin investigation?
Yes, I did.
And what did you do to further that aspect of your investigation?
Well, I guess I made queries, but I was under the assumption that that fire was being investigated separately. Do
you know whether, or did you assume that it's being investigated as a distinct fire or as part of the Gospers Mountain fire, or you don't know?
Oh, as part of the Gospers fire, yes.
Excuse me. No further questions.
Right, Sergeant, I'll just see if there's any other questions for you. Mr. Newton.
No questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Sergeant. You're excused.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Ward.
Your Honour, the next witness is Matthew O'Donnell.
Mr. O'Donnell, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. We'll just hear from the court officer.
Silence, please. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Ms Ward.
Thank you, Your Honour. Would you state your full name and professional address?
Matthew O'Donnell, address 1A George Booth Drive, Cameron Park.
Do you remain a capability manager with the Hunter Area Command of the Rural Fire Service?
Yes.
And could you briefly outline for Her Honour what that position involves?
So I'm responsible for ensuring that the New South Wales Rural Fire Service has sufficient resources within the 5 districts that make up the Hunter to address risks in those districts. So I cover the Central Coast, Lower Hunter, Hunter Valley, Mid Coast and Lower North Coast districts.
In June of 2020, were you asked to take on the role of lead investigator and to conduct a factual investigation into backburning operations on the 14th of December 2019 during the Gospers Mountain fire?
Yes, but with one clarification. So I was engaged in April 2020 and delivered the report in June 2020.
Thank you. Now, Mr O'Donnell, that report is before the court. Are the contents of it true and correct?
Yes, they are.
And are there any matters that you wish to clarify within that report?
No.
Within the Coronial brief, Her Honour also has a statement that you provided or dated the 19th of October 2020. Are the contents of that statement true and correct?
Yes, they are.
And do you need to make any amendments or additions to that statement?
No, I don't.
I firstly want to ask you some questions just about the direction to you to undertake your factual investigation. Do you follow?
Yes.
Who gave you that direction?
So I was engaged by then Assistant Commissioner Jason Heffernan.
And when was that?
That was on the 16th of April 2020.
You had other people assisting you in the course of the investigation, is that right?
That's correct.
But you assumed the responsibility as lead investigator, correct?
Correct. There were a series of investigations that we were tasked to undertake. So I was the lead for that series of investigations, assisted by investigators for each.
Were the series of investigations you were asked to undertake all related to the Gospers Mountain fire or to a range of matters from across that fire season?
To a range of matters across the fire season.
Just focus then on the Gospers Mountain investigation. Within that investigation, were there particular topics or themes that you were specifically asked to consider in relation to that sitting within that overarching investigation?
Correct. So our focus on the Gospers Mountain fire was limited to the circumstances and sequence of events that were related to the loss of containment of the backburn around Mount Wilson.
Thank you. Had you been involved in managing the RFS response to either the Gospers Mountain fire or the fire that was later known as the Grose Valley fire prior to being asked to step in as lead investigator?
No, I was not.
And what about the other members of your team? Had they had any prior involvement in either of those fires?
No.
So is it fair to say that although you were all from within the Rural Fire Service, you were otherwise independent of the decision-making that had taken place, particularly during the backburning operations in the vicinity of Mount Wilson Road?
Yes. Yes.
Do you have a copy of your factual investigation report for the Mount Wilson and Bilpin sector available today?
Yes, I do.
And is that a copy that has red numbers in the bottom right-hand corner, taken from the Coronial brief?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Very well. I'm sorry, Your Honour. Could I ask you to turn up, firstly, page 147 using the red numbers, and it's page 9 of 86 using your numbering?
Yes.
Do you see there a heading at 1.3 that reads evidence gathering?
Yes, I do.
And it seems that you there set out in the tables that follow the material that was made available to you or that you obtained during the course of that investigation. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, correct.
So there were a number of interviews and witness statements, situation reports reviewed, incident action plan and the like.
Yes, correct.
One of the things you refer to there is having obtained logbooks from various personnel involved in the Gospers Mountain fire, including the incident controller and the management support officer. Do you see that referred to on page 148 or page 10 of 86?
Yes.
Could you just explain to Her Honour how the logbooks are actually maintained in the field during the course of an incident controller or management support officer's involvement in an incident management team?
Yeah, so the operational logbooks are typically assigned to a position as opposed to an individual. You know, where a day shift incident controller hands over to a night shift, there's continuity in logs and shared situational awareness between the shift changes. Those logs are typically kept by the individual to record key actions and decisions. So they don't tend to be a very, you know, it depends on who's taking the logs, but they are generally not, you know, verbatim transcripts of conversations. They are, you know, a record of key actions and decisions.
So tell me if this is fair, a contemporaneous file note of those decisions that the office holder feels are important enough to warrant recording?
Correct.
And important enough to include so that whoever might follow in a later shift in that position will have some sort of a contemporaneous note that they can go back to if needed.
Correct.
You also had regard to a strategic backburn plan V2. Can you see that on page 148 or 10 of 86? And it's the bottom fifth, it's the entry fifth from bottom under the heading of documentary evidence.
Yes.
Was that strategic backburn plan the plan relating to the backburn that was actually implemented?
Yes, as I understand it, yes.
And you also had regard to some bushfire information community newsletters that you set out on that page. Do you see that?
Yes, correct.
Were those community newsletters the newsletters most proximate to the time of ignition of the fire to the east of Mount Wilson Road?
Yes, as I understand it, they were newsletters that were relevant to that particular operation.
Now, if we can't go so far as this, just say so, but should Her Honour conclude that they would have been the most, or I withdraw that, should Her Honour conclude they would have been the current community newsletters or the most recent community newsletters that had circulated prior to the 14th of December?
I couldn't say. There may have been other newsletters,
Yes.
but they may not have been as relevant to the backburning operation. They may have been about the general fire behaviour and fire progression associated with the Gospers Mountain fire. Only to say that the newsletters that are indicated, as I understand it, were particularly relevant to that, to preparing the community and giving the community advanced warning that that backburn was to take place.
Okay. Did you, or to your knowledge, did anyone in the team look at things like the actual weather forecasts or predictions for fire progression that the incident management team looked at a time when planning their response?
Yes, we did.
Could I now ask you to turn to page 220 using the brief numbers, or page 82 of 86 of your report?
Yes.
Now, what I'm going to do now, Mr. O'Donnell, is ask you some questions in context of a particular focus this week on the cause and origin of the fire that commenced on the eastern side of Mount Wilson Road. So do you understand that's the topic that I'm going to zero in on here?
Yes, that's fine.
At the top of that page, you've inserted the heading of spot fires. You see that?
Yes. Yes.
And you begin by saying it was not within the scope of this investigation to determine cause and origin based on a physical fire investigation. Do you see that?
Yes.
So far as the court is aware, there has not been any physical fire investigation of the scene where a spot over is believed to have crossed Mount Wilson Road. Are you aware of any physical investigation of that scene ever having been undertaken?
I'm not aware. That's not to say that one didn't, but no, I'm not aware of whether there was one undertaken or not.
Thank you. You then go on in that paragraph to refer to your review of the evidence that you'd obtained during the investigation and an understanding that the fire to the, well, that a fire is believed to have originated from spot overs from backburning operation in the Bell Division on 14 December. Do you see that reference?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Can you tell Her Honour the physical parameters of the Bell Division, where it was, how far it extended? Either by reference to roads or landmarks or townships?
So very, very generally, Bell Division was on the southern side of the Gospers Mountain fire, in the vicinity of the Bells line of road. My understanding is that it extended from, I think, the area around Bilpin, west towards and potentially beyond the community of Bell. It's my understanding that there was another division to the east that was the Bilpin division, and another division to the west that sort of went towards Clarence and Clarence Dargan and beyond.
All right. Do you know the name of that division to the west?
Not off the top of my head, no.
And when you say that the Bell Division was on the southern side of the Gospers Mountain fire, would you agree that as at 14 December 2019, when the backburn was implemented around the corner of Bell's Line of Road and Mount Wilson Road, the Gospers Mountain fire had not yet reached Mount Wilson or Mount Tomah or communities in the vicinity?
Correct.
I'm now going to have a page from your report brought up on screen. It's page 194 of the brief, or page 56 of 86 using your numbering. And you can either turn it up for yourself or it will become visible on the screen in a moment. Can you see that, Mr. O'Donnell?
Yes, I can.
All right. I'm not sure that I can. Just let me get my hard copy. Do you recognise that as a map that you have included in your investigation report?
Yes.
And it refers to the Bell Division, which is marked to the right of the Mount Wilson Road.
Yes, correct.
You see that? Okay. Now, although it might be a little obscured by the way it is displayed in court, that seems to show along Mount Wilson Road, firstly, a sector recorded as the October sector.
Yes, that's correct.
And was that the sector responsible for the backburn along Mount Wilson Road, but to the west of the road?
That's correct.
And there seems to be a reference on the map to the Dalpura sector along Bell's Line of Road, close to the Mount Wilson Road intersection.
Yes, that's correct.
And what was the intended role of the Dalpura sector when the backburn was planned for the 14th of October? The 14th of December?
So both the Dalpura and the October, or the resources assigned to both the Dalpura and October sectors were to work together. They were to anchor a backburn at the intersection of Mount Wilson Road and Bell's Line of Road. Crews within the October sector were then to extend backburning in a northerly direction along Mount Wilson Road, and then onto a fire trail that runs to the west of Mount Wilson Road and I suppose follows that northern interface of the Mount Wilson village. Crews in the Dalpura sector were at the same time tasked to work their way in a northwesterly direction, implementing a backburn on the northern side of the Bell's Line of Road, with the view to that backburn extending toward and beyond Bell towards Clarence Dargan as part of the Southern Containment Strategy.
Thank you. You've just said that the October sector were to extend the backburn along Mount Wilson Road and onto a fire trail west of Mount Wilson Road. Is that right?
That's correct.
Is the fire trail evident?
Yes, it is. So I don't know whether you can make it out on the map on screen.
Can we try the grid references first, and then we might zero in on that? So we've got grid references just visible.
I can't make out the grid references on the screen, but you will see approximately 1.5 grid squares above the Bell Division annotation. You will see a containment line and backburn mapping.
Yes.
That deviates to the west of Mount Wilson Road.
So it's on that map, it's the blue dotted line with some other hatching along it that deviates to the left-hand side of the black line, which is Mount Wilson Road.
Correct.
The map also shows, if we continue along Mount Wilson Road for a moment, past October sector, there's a reference to Mount Wilson sector. Do you see that?
Yes.
And what does that refer to?
So that's an adjoining sector. So the fire ground is broken into divisions and sectors as part of the fire ground organisation. So that just refers to the next phase of that southern containment line.
And along that phase of the southern containment line, were there appliances tasked to that point at the time that the backburn was set at the corner of Bell's Line of Road and Mount Wilson Road?
No. So earlier in the day, when the backburning operations were commenced, crews were only initially assigned into the October sector and Dalpura sector.
Thank you.
As those crews advanced, the backburn, it was at the discretion of the divisional commander and the sector leaders to task resources into those other sectors, depending on how far the backburn was extended on the day.
Similarly, I'm sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say that partway through the day, crews had difficulties, I suppose technical difficulties getting the backburn up onto the mountain, and a decision was made to move resources into that northern end of the October sector. It's possible that at that point some crews may have bled into the Mount Wilson sector, but I can't be sure.
Thank you. Similarly, if we come along Bell's Line of Road past Dalpura sector, there's a reference to Flagstaff sector.
Yes.
Do you see that? And does the same apply to Flagstaff sector as it did for Mount Wilson sector?
Correct, yes.
Coming then back to your findings in the investigation report, and I'm back now on page 220 or 82 of 86. In the last sentence of the first paragraph, you record the spot fires were a significant distance from the main fire front. Do you see that? Second bottom line.
Yep.
Now, are you there referring to the spot fires that are believed to have travelled to the west of Mount Wilson Road?
To the east of Mount
sorry,
Wilson
the east.
Road.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And where you say significant distance from the main fire front, are you referring to the Gospers Mountain fire?
Correct. Not the backburn, but the southern edge of the Gospers Mountain fire.
Thank you. Were you able to estimate the distance between the closest point of the southern edge of the Gospers Mountain fire and the suspected location of these spot overs?
Not the spot overs themselves. It's my understanding that the southern edge of the Gospers Mountain fire was on that day approximately 12 kilometres to the north of the Mount Wilson interface, northern interface.
Is it impossible for embers to travel, firstly, that distance, 12 kilometres, from one fire edge into another fuel into spot fire?
It's not impossible under the right conditions. It would be abnormal, and I don't believe that the conditions on the day were conducive to spotting of that distance, nor in that direction.
Partly because of the prevailing winds on that day, is that right?
Correct.
Did your investigation lead to a conclusion that at the time the spot overs led to fire to the eastern side of Mount Wilson Road, the wind was actually coming from a south-southwesterly position?
Correct.
And that in itself would decrease the probability that the fire to the east of Mount Wilson Road had actually travelled down from the Gospers Mountain fire to the north.
Correct.
As a result, is it your opinion that it's extremely unlikely that the fire to the east of Mount Wilson Road resulted as a spot over from Gospers Mountain fire?
Yes.
If we could then come back to the concluding words of that paragraph that I've just been asking you about, where you go on to say the investigation was not aware of any other potential ignition sources. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, does that mean even though no physical fire investigation had been conducted that you're aware of, and although you weren't tasked to specifically conduct a cause and origin investigation, from your broader investigation into the circumstances around this fire, there's nothing to suggest alternate sources for the fire, such as juvenile fire play, campgrounds, cigarettes?
Correct. No other evidence was advanced by the incident management team nor any witnesses that we were engaged with of juvenile fire play, lightning activity, etc.
Thank you. Would you go so far as to say all of the evidence that you reviewed in the course of your investigation points to the fire that commenced on 14 December 2019 to the east of Mount Wilson Road as originating or arising as a result of spot over from a backburn within the Bell Division backburn anchored off Bell's Line of Road and Mount Wilson Road?
Yes, correct.
In the course of your investigation, did you come to understand that there are different hypotheses as to which particular sector within the Bell Division might have generated the backburn that led to the spot over?
Yes, correct.
I'm going to divide those into two different hypotheses and ask you some questions about each hypothesis. Firstly, hypothesis one is that it's the burn along Bell's Line of Road that was responsible for the spot over to the east of Mount Wilson. Do you follow? East of Mount Wilson
Yes.
Road. Okay.
Yes.
In the course of your investigation, did you receive evidence that might have pointed for and against the likelihood of that hypothesis actually explaining the spot fire?
So we had engaged with a number of witnesses that were both on the ground, and one witness that was the air attack supervisor. And whilst both of those whilst the intensity of both of those backburns did escalate throughout the day, the view of those that had eyes on both of those backburns as they were moving in the landscape was that it is likely that Mount Wilson, the backburning along Mount Wilson Road was the origin of those spot overs.
That was not a unanimous view, though, was it, from all of the witnesses that you or your investigated?
Yes, correct.
There are some RFS personnel who were on scene who hypothesised that the backburn came from the Bell's Line of Road or Dalpura sector.
Yes, that is correct.
Do you understand how under that hypothesis it's theorised that the Bell's Line of Road Dalpura sector backburn would have spotted over to the eastern side of Mount Wilson Road?
Yeah, so the hypothesis was that the backburning within the Dalpura sector along the Bells line of road had advanced to a point where it was getting ahead of the progression of the Mount Wilson Road backburn, and was potentially spotting into that area before the Mount Wilson Road backburn could catch up.
Can you explain the significance of the getting ahead philosophy? What are we talking about when we've got two different sectors that originate anchored off the intersection of those two roads, but who are then working to set fires in different directions as one moves along Mount Wilson Road and the other along Bells line of road? What's the plan or strategy?
So that in these instances, what our crews will try and do is to coordinate the movement or extension of both of those lines of backburn, so that as depth is achieved into the area that's being burnt, the two backburns will meet one another as opposed to one sort of outflanking the other and moving into an area where you don't have depth of containment along a containment line.
And if you don't have depth of containment along a containment line, you might not have adequate control.
Yeah, that's correct.
Ultimately, you concluded that you cannot rule out hypothesis 1 and a burn along Bells line of road as being a potential cause. Is that right?
That's correct.
I'll now move to hypothesis 2, which is the hypothesis that it was the backburn along Mount Wilson Road that was responsible for the spot overs. You've already said today that, in part, you've already said today that you'd heard from the air attack supervisor as to his observations at the scene. Have I fairly summarised that evidence you've given?
Yes, correct.
Right. And was the air attack supervisor Craig Burley?
That's correct.
At the time that Mr. Burley made observations of the spot over to the east of Mount Wilson Road, was he in the air himself at that time?
Yes.
And in the course of your investigation and your team's interviews or discussions with Mr. Burley, did he report seeing the fire to the east of Mount Wilson Road for himself, or was he directed to that fire by reports from other RFS or other officers?
It's my recollection is that he was not the one that detected the spot fires, but that the spot fires had been early detected by ground crews and he was then tasked to gather intelligence. I may be wrong. He may have observed it at or about the same time, but it's my understanding the initial report came from ground crews.
Okay, thank you. Could you please turn to page 227? This is not one of the pages included within your brief formally, within your report formally, but it sits within the Coronial brief behind your report. So you might need to look it up in the brief version. Okay.
I have that.
Do you have there a document that says at the top of the page, interview with Craig Burley?
Yes, I do.
And is that a statement that you or one of your investigation team took from Mr. Burley in the course of the investigation?
Yes, it is notes
Notes.
related to an interview that was undertaken.
Okay. Could I ask you to please come down just below halfway down that page and you'll see an entry that says mid-afternoon.
Yes.
Mount Wilson Road starting to see increase in fire behaviour.
Yes.
Slight wind change, southwest, and slight increase in wind. And then a reference to electricity easement. noticed the backing fire, which may create a slop over potential, which would be assisted by the winds.
Yes.
Where is that electricity easement, do you know, that Mr Burley is apparently referring to there?
So there are a series of electricity easements on the western side of Mount Wilson Road to the north of Bell's line of road.
Are they easements underneath high voltage power lines or some other sort of infrastructure?
Yeah, yes, correct.
And if you could just come down another couple of lines, do you see a reference in those notes to fire in the easement took a run up slope and spotted onto eastern side of Mount Wilson?
Yes, correct.
Is that some of the information from Mr Burley that you then relied upon in reaching your conclusion that it was more likely that the spot over to the east of Mount Wilson Road came from the October sector? Mount
Yes,
Wilson
correct.
Road background? Okay.
Yes, correct.
Can we now, I'm going to have a photo brought up on screen coming from your report at page 220, which is 82 of 86. And again, Mr O'Donnell, that will become visible on screen in a moment.
Yes,
Here we
I
go.
have that now.
All right, do you recognise that as a figure that we have taken from your investigation report?
Yes, correct.
And it's marked as a witness sketch of the fire progression. Is that a document actually completed by the air attack supervisor, Mr Burley?
I actually don't know whether it was generated by Mr Burley or was generated by my investigator whilst talking to or interviewing Mr Burley.
I see. Are the electricity easements visible on that photo?
Yes, correct.
Whereabouts?
So you will see one easement that is running on an east-west alignment, I suppose a quarter of the way up the photograph, and then another easement that runs in a generally north-south alignment, initially on the western side of Mount Wilson Road, but crossing Mount Wilson Road towards the top of the photograph.
So, if you don't know, just say so. But what is your understanding of the easement that Mr Burley is referring to as having potentially contributed to the spot over from the Mount Wilson Road back berm?
My understanding was that the easement running on a north-south alignment was potentially working with other terrain in the location to funnel or draw fire generally sort of to the north.
That north-south easement, we can see from the photo because many of the arrows are actually pointing right towards it or sit slightly across it to the west of Mount Wilson Road. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Now, in your... I'm sorry, go on.
No, sorry.
In your report at page 221, do you see at the top of that page, you firstly refer to some things you learnt from the air attack supervisor in the first paragraph?
Yes.
And then in the second paragraph, you refer to testimony from a local group captain who had a vantage point on Mount Wilson Road. Do you see that?
Yes. Yes, I do.
And who was that local group captain?
I don't recall the name of the individual.
All right. And do you know if it was a man or a woman?
No, I don't recall.
Okay. And do you know what brigade they may have been from?
No, I don't recall.
Very well. You go on in that paragraph to say this was someone who had a vantage point on Mount Wilson Road with a view to the Mount Wilson Road backburn. and initially reported the spot fire based on bearings. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is this potentially the person who first called in the presence of spot fires to the east of Mount Wilson Road, which then resulted in the air attack supervisor being sent out to investigate the scene?
It may well have been, but I would say it may not have been the group officer themselves who initially cited the evidence of the spot over. It may have been one of their crews that had detected the spot over initially.
Well, the group captain may well be feeding up the chain,
Yes.
information reported to him or her by other brigade members.
Yes, correct.
Is it entirely possible that there was more than one spot over to the east of Mount Wilson Road, so that there's not necessarily one small fire that results from the backburn, but perhaps a series of small ignitions?
Yes, that is a possibility.
If you could now turn to page 221 of your investigation report, that's page 83 of 86 using your numbering.
Yes.
And we won't have this brought up on screen, but can you firstly see that you've included there figure 56, an estimated fire spread map?
Yes.
And it includes reference to an estimated spot location. Do you see that?
Yes, I can. Yes.
How was the estimated spot location arrived at?
My understanding is by aerial intelligence from the air attack supervisor.
Just underneath that figure in your report, you express this conclusion: the investigation was unable to determine the precise origin of the spot overs based on physical evidence or a review of operational records and witness testimony. Based on the evidence at hand, it is likely that the spot overs originated from the backburn along Mount Wilson Road, spreading rapidly based on terrain and escalating weather conditions and outflanking the crews. However, a spot over originating from the backburning along Bell's line of road cannot be ruled out. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And does that remain your view today?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honour. Those are my questions for this witness.
Yes. Mr Newton, do you have any questions?
No questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Mr O'Donnell. You're excused.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you.
Your Honour, that's the last of the evidence for the hearings listed this week. I'm now going to make just some brief submissions as to likely closing submissions that will follow at a later time, dealing firstly with the Gospers Mountain Fire, the Wollamai National Park fire inquiry. Your Honour now has the benefit of the documentary material contained within the brief of evidence, tendered as Exhibit 55A, as well as the oral testimony of Detective Sergeant Joshua Holgate, Peter Jones, the New South Wales Rural Fire Service fire investigator, Rebecca Lowe and Andrew Benson. At a later stage of Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address Your Honour on the origin of the Gospers Mountain Fire, Wollamai National Park. In that regard, I can foreshadow now formal submissions are likely to be made that the fire commenced around 11 a.m. on 26 October 2019 as a result of a lightning strike to a tree, or perhaps two trees, in remote bushland within the Wollamai National Park on a small knoll about 2 to 3 kilometres southwest of Gospers Mountain at the location of grid reference 558382. Can I otherwise invite Your Honour to formally stand over the Gospers Mountain Fire inquiry to 5 September 2022?
Yes, thank you, Ms Ward. I do that now.
Next, Your Honour, moving to the Gross Valley Fire, Mount Wilson Fire Inquiry. Your Honour now has the benefit of the documentary material contained within the brief of evidence, tendered as Exhibit 56A, as well as the oral testimony of Detective Sergeant Laura Harvey, Darren Howell, the New South Wales Rural Fire Service fire investigator, Senior Sergeant Neil Welshinger, and Matthew O'Donnell. Again, at a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address Your Honour on the cause and origin of the Gross Valley Fire, Mount Wilson inquiry. In that regard, I can foreshadow now that formal submissions are likely to be made that the fire was caused by spotting from a backburn implemented by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service on 14 December 2019 along the intersection of the Bells Line of Road and Mount Wilson Road. Again, could I formally ask Your Honour to stand that last matter over until the 5th of September 2022?
Yes, I do that now.
Your Honour, the plan for next week's hearing schedule is as follows. On Monday, Your Honour will conduct an inquiry into the fire known as the Little L Complex Fire. That will be a short hearing only, given that the circumstances around that fire are largely set out within the material that Your Honour will receive within the coronial brief. Then on Tuesday, Your Honour's inquiry will commence into the Palmer's Oakey fire, and that hearing is expected to last 2 to 3 days through next week, Tuesday through to Thursday.
Thank you, Ms Ward. Unless there's anything else, we will adjourn.
Your Honour, just one thing. Firstly,
Yep.
Ms Woodland will be appearing on Monday.
Thank you.
And I've arranged for her to be sent the link. And also, if I could just express my appreciation for Mr. Howell, who I think has now done his final evidence, and he is a volunteer who has gone to various places throughout New South Wales. So if I can just express the appreciation of the Rural Fire Service for his service throughout that fire season, given the amount of times he's now had to give evidence before Your Honour.
Yes, and I echo that. We are, of course, most appreciative for the time he's put into that. Thank you, Mr Newton.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Unless there's anything else.
Not for my part, Your Honour.
All right, we'll adjourn until Monday morning at 10 a.m.